It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, folks, I watched part 2 of Frank Cannata and Bob Goldberg discussing the new Konica Minolta dealer contract. As I listened to part 2, I became more disgusted than I was at part 1. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the reality. You got a retired BTA lawyer, you got an industry influencer sitting there selling the merits of the Konica Minolta new dealer agreement. They're selling it. They're defending it. They brought up that 90-day cancellation without clause. And the retired BTA lawyer, you know what he says? Well, it's got this in there. It's got to be fair and equitable. And then he goes to quote some case that happened years ago in California where a dealer was canceled, didn't think it was fair and equitable. The court agreed. So he got his dealership back, and I'm sure that the relationship with that OEM went really well for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how two individuals in our industry, two senior leaders in our industry, can sit there and talk about a Konica Minolta new dealer contract and not bring into the conversation Konica Minolta's terrible financials. Because I believe the two are connected. I believe Konica Minolta's terrible financial situation is absolutely connected to that 90-day cancellation without cause. I also believe that our industry, those dealer friends of mine, they need to think really hard on who has their best interest in mind. Look, the retired BTA lawyer Bob Goldberg has been in our industry for 50 years. He deserves to be applauded for that. But at the end of the day, he is no longer the BTA lawyer. In part 2, they showed a picture of Greg Goldberg, Bob's son. They said, Greg Goldberg, the BTA lawyer, reach out if you want to talk to him or me. That's what Bob said. Reach out to Greg Goldberg, the BTA lawyer, or me. So, what do you mean, or me? Ladies and gentlemen, it was just about a week ago that I had Adam Gregory on the show, and Adam Gregory is the president of the BTA, and Adam made it absolutely clear that there's one lawyer that represents dealers through the BTA, and his name is Greg Goldberg. It is not Bob Goldberg. Bob Goldberg retired. And yes, Bob Goldberg can do whatever he wants. He can work for whoever he wants. He can work free for whoever he wants. But at the end of the day, I'm urging all of my dealer friends to think hard on who has your best interest at heart. Let me share some thoughts. So a while back, I write an article, Konica Minolta contract. And boy, got a lot of views on LinkedIn. And then we see Frank Cannata show up on Fridays with Frank. He does a little show on it. He says in the show, maybe I should get Bob Goldberg to come on the show. Well, I do a video. I decided I wrote the article, let me do a video and really talk about it. And then, well, Frank Cannata and Bob Goldberg do an episode. I watch that episode and I write an article. Is there a conflict of interest? And boy, that article flew around LinkedIn. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason that I wrote the first article, the reason that I did the episode, the reason that I wrote the second article, the reason I'm here today is for my dealer friends. I want to give them a voice. And I know the conversation is extremely tough for a whole lot of people. But because nobody else in our media, none of our analysts, none of our consultants want to talk about this. And we can all guess why. So I'm going to talk about it. And of course, when I have to talk about it all by myself, I usually got to talk really, really loud to cut through the silence. My question remains, why is Bob Goldberg defending the Konica Minolta new dealer agreement? Why is he out there defending this? Because that's really what that part 2 was all about. It was about defending the contract. It's obvious Frank Cannata is paid by Konica Minolta, so he's simply doing his job. And I'm not saying that to be mean to Frank. At the end of the day, we all work with sponsors. And Frank could tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking, after I wrote the article, Konica Minolta said, hey, is there any way you could do anything on this? I mean, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. However, Bob is saying he wasn't paid by Konica Minolta for spending weeks reviewing the contract. Did Konica Minolta engage with Bob because he doesn't charge? That kind of makes sense because Konica Minolta's financials are a train wreck mess. Of course, that part of the conversation wasn't included in either part 1 or part 2. I think it would be interesting to know what Bob suggested that Konica Minolta change in the new dealer agreement before he blessed it. So he's talking about all these things and how great they all are. What did you make him change? What was in that contract that you just thought was terrible for dealers? And you said, we're not going to do this. And Bob Goldberg, I realize that you're retired, you're probably very well off, and you could probably do things for nothing. But when you say in a video, in an interview, or I should say a discussion, that you worked with an OEM's lawyers for weeks, I still struggle with the fact. And at the end of the day, it could have all been pro bono, but that doesn't change my thinking. So I write the article, is there a conflict of interest? Bob throws a comment in there. Let me read it. Unfortunately, Mr. Stashevsko did not investigate the facts. I was not paid by Konica Minolta, and in fact, never been paid by an OEM or supplier. I encourage dealers to view part 2 of Fridays with Frank next week for the entire story. Never been paid by an OEM or supplier. We have to take him at his word. Why would he lie, right? Down here, here's my comment. Robert Goldberg, the fact you mentioned was you worked with KM lawyers for weeks. Being paid or pro bono is irrelevant to my thoughts. I'm looking forward to part 2. Well, I watched part 2. It didn't make me feel any better. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we need to be talking about Konica Minolta's financials. I'll do a separate episode on this on Monday. But here's a little snapshot of their FY 2024. Operating profit losses of $438.2 million. Okay? This company has lost money 1, 2, 3, 4 years. They made a little bit of money last year, 2%. Here they are again, $438.2 million operating profit loss. And we don't want to bring this up when we're discussing a new dealer agreement that has a 90-day cancellation without clause. And if anybody doesn't believe that these aren't too tied together, you're naive as hell. I want to go back in time and I want to talk about why I believe we need to consider who has our best interests. If we go back to 2016, there was a meeting out in the desert. It was called Technology United back then. Today it's called the Consortium, and they have the meeting, the ECS meeting. So back then it was Technology had the ECS meeting. Today it's called the Consortium, has the ECS meeting. And by the way, it's the same gentleman that heads that up. His name is Michael Strabalio. You can see on stage Michael Strabalio and Rick Taylor, the then president and CEO of Konica Minolta USA. And they're talking about Forza. And we all know, Forza, the ERP that was going to change the industry, turned out to be pretty much a mess, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, at an ECS meeting, we have Bob Goldberg dressed up like Sapman. Let me read the caption as written in one of the industry's magazines. Bob Goldberg is Sapman, saving the channel one dealer at a time. So the question is, what was the relationship between the BTA lawyer and Forza? What was the relationship? Why is he Sapman? He's out there selling a product. What did Bob Goldberg, the BTA lawyer, know about the relationship that MWAI had with Grey Rock Capital, the money behind it, as he wore a cape selling the merits of Forza? Then Konica Minolta gobbles up Forza in the middle of the night. I've talked about that numerous times. I've challenged, the leaders over there at MWAI, Konica Minolta leaders. Why don't you tell the world what happened with that? Why don't you share with the world the money that was lost through Grey Rock Capital, the money behind it? But here's an article, when Konica Minolta buys it. Let me just read this part to you. This is from Sam Arago, the current CEO of Konica Minolta, dated 2018. We've engaged with BTA counsel, Bob Goldberg, to assist with the language within our dealer agreements specific to the ERP offering. So in 2018, Konica Minolta engages Bob Goldberg. Bob Goldberg's wearing a SAP cape promoting SAB1. We all know that was the operating system behind Forza, right? It's all tied together, right? And now Konica Minolta's engaging him after they buy the thing in the middle of the night. What was Bob's awareness of why that thing even got sold to Konica Minolta? What was Bob's awareness of Forza even maintaining as a going concern, even in Konica's hands? Whose interests were in mind? Ladies and gentlemen, there was a default judgment against MWAI for $700,000. I did an episode on it. I saw numerous articles in Action Intelligence, but I didn't see anything in our industry's media and analyst magazines. I didn't see anything in the BTA, Office Technology magazine, about that. Of course, wasn't the BTA lawyer on the board of the BTA. ENX magazine, imaging channel, industry analysts, isn't imaging channel and the industry analysts the publications for both Technology United and the consortium now, NECS? Just asking the question. Ladies and gentlemen, May 4th, 2021, Bob Goldberg joins as advisory to the consortium partners. So now we got the consortium. We got Bob Goldberg as an advisor to the consortium. The consortium is a whole bunch of suppliers trying to do business with dealers. A member of the consortium is All Covered Forza. We all know that All Covered is owned by Konica. We all know that Konica, old CEO. We all know the Forza, MWAI CEO. We all know the current CEO of Konica Minolta. And we all know Bob Goldberg, the BTA lawyer, are pretty well connected. So I guess this isn't representing suppliers, and if he is representing any of these suppliers or helping any of these suppliers, he's doing it all pro bono, obviously, right? But again, whose best interest? Now, August of 2024, shortly after Bob retires from the BTA, he finds himself as the chairperson of the Executive Advisory Group at ECS. Folks, I'm asking some questions here. And again, Bob can do whatever the hell he wants. He retired from the BTA. But I think that I don't think it's fair for Bob not to be questioned. I just don't. Yes, I still believe the new Konica Minolta U.S. dealer agreement is terrible for dealers, even after part 2 of Fridays with Frank. And here's what else I believe. I think this new Konica Minolta U.S. dealer is fantastic for all the other OEMs seeking to take away Konica Minolta dealers. I'd go seize the moment. I would talk to those dealers about Konica Minolta's financials. I would talk to those dealers about Konica Minolta's cancellation without cause. I would talk to those dealers about how they could be positioning themselves around this service in open territories, which, by the way, I think there's some merit to that. But folks, we got to start questioning. I want to close with this. Not all boats can float, regardless of unrealistic optimism or unwarranted pandering. Something I believe is practiced too often. We got a boat, obviously that boat needs to sink. It's not going to get saved. Sometimes our industry, we're so excited about pandering to people for absolutely no reason whatsoever, and we have this unrealistic optimism. We're afraid to challenge anything. We're afraid to bring up any kind of conversations, and I think it's really bad for our industry when we can't have conversations. And folks, I still struggle with the fact that you got 2 senior leaders in our industry basically defending the new Konica Minolta agreement without even considering Konica Minolta's financial situation. And I would still like to know exactly what that retired BTA lawyer told Konica to cross off that contract before he gave it its blessing. Just some things to think about, my friends, because we all know this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. And I'll see you all on Monday.